Okay, yeah. So good afternoon, everybody. I am going to be presenting my screen. Please let me know when it is visible. Today we will be discussing the different types of data.
It is visible, ma'am.
Is the screen visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So today we are going to discuss about the different types of data sets. The first type of data set that we are going to be talking about in this regard is the record data set. Okay. Now, you are already kind of exposed to this kind of data sets. For instance, the kind of data sets that we used in the relational database management systems, where you saw there were tables, right? So each row represented a record, and each column actually depicted a attribute of this record. Okay, so we said that a record or a data object, as we also discussed in the last class possibly, was a collection of the values of these attributes, right? And this kind of data is known as the record data. Now, what we are interested in looking here is the different types of data that we generally encounter for data mining, which fall under the purview of record data sets. Now, vis-a-vis the other kind of data sets that we are going to discuss later, you will see that these kind of data sets also have another peculiar characteristic which is to be noted. The record data sets do not have relationships among the objects. They don't have any explicit known beforehand object relationship among the objects. Okay, that means that we are free to consider that each record or each data object, okay, each row is independent. So that is why, if you remember, we had data, the data such as employee data or transaction data, as we had discussed earlier. They are all treated as individual records. Okay, so please see, uh, as an example of the record data, this is the kind of data that we have already seen, if you remember, right? So as I said, each record, each row is a record here, right? Now, as another example of the record data, let us look at a special kind of data which is known as a data matrix. So a data matrix is usually distinguished from this kind of data in the sense that a data matrix generally has all numerical values. Okay, so it is amenable to special kind of operations, mathematical operations that we can do on them. So if you remember, you have learned about matrices in uh, maybe class 11, class 12, and learnt various operations which are possible on the matrices, right? Finding out the inverse of a matrix, or how to multiply two matrices or add two matrices, what is a uh, uh, finding out eigenvectors and all those things. So lower triangular matrix, upper triangular matrix. So as soon as we talk about a data matrix, we have in mind, what we have in mind is a matrix, is a record matrix only. This is again a kind of a record matrix. You can see that in terms of rows and columns. But the only difference is that in a general uh, record data, the values could also be categorical, right? They could also be nominal. But here the values are generally numeric, and therefore several operations can be, are special operation, metric operations are applied here, right? They can be applied here, right? So after that, let us see another kind of data. Again, I have talked about this, but possibly you are looking at the figure today for the first time. This kind of data is known as document data, and we generally make what is known as a document term matrix for this kind of data. Okay, now what is document term matrix? So document term matrix is a, again, obviously, a kind of record data where each record, that is each row, is a document. Okay, and each column is the words in these documents. Okay, so if you remember, we had talked about this earlier. What do? We note down the frequency of each of these terms in these cells. That means how many terms, how many times this particular word is appearing in this document, I note down here. Okay, so in document 1, the word team appears 3 times. In document 2, the word team appears 0 times. Document 3, the word team appears 0 times. Okay, so if I take a total of the column, I get to know how many times my word or term is appearing in my entire document set. Okay, and if I take the total this way, then I get what is the total number of words in this particular document. Okay, right? So this kind of matrix is used for, this is one of the basic matrix that forms the basis of text clustering or text mining, as we call it. So there are various things, various operations that can be defined on this kind of a matrix. Okay, uh, all the text mining, generally, the text mining operations, they start with this kind of a matrix. Okay. Now there are several important characteristics of data that we have earlier discussed. One of them is dimensionality. If you remember, I have discussed dimensionality with you in detail. So dimensionality means the when the number of attributes in our data set is very, very large. Okay, then we say that the dimensionality of the data set is very large. Another characteristic in this regard is sparsity. So what is sparse data? Again, this is something that I have discussed with you very often. So sparse data is the data where the non-zero values are very few. Okay, most of the data are, zeros. What is also very important to note here is that although we have not possibly said this, but we have always assumed that these non-zero values are also more important than the zero values. Okay, now let me take uh, this example with you again. For example, if we look at this document term matrix, then the documents where these words are present, not present, are not that important possibly for any mining operation, right? Only the documents which contain these particular terms are important for us. For example, if I were to, one of the uh, mining jobs which can be done on this kind of data is to find out document similarities. Okay, so if I were to find out document similarities, then I would like to find out from this kind, I would first like to build up the document term matrix. Okay, and then I would like to find out which documents contain mostly, similar or same terms. So as you can see that, document 2 and 3 both contain the word coach, right? Similarly, they also contain the word soccer, right? And maybe, they also contain, let's say, this word season, right? Or game, right? If I'm just assuming, okay? So that could be a pointer to say that, these two documents are more related to each other than to all other documents, right? So this is based upon the frequency of each term. That means the number of times that they have appeared. Now, if that happens to be zero, it is not very interesting to us, right? It doesn't give us any information, any pointer in this regard, right? So that is why we say that, generally in sparse data, we deal with what is known as asymmetric data. Now, what is asymmetric data? Asymmetric data is the data where the non-zero values are more important than the zero values. They are treated differently than the zero values. Okay, there might be data where both 0 and 1, they occupy the same importance. Such kind of data is known as symmetric data. Okay, so let me just show you. So we see that, as we have just discussed, accordingly, the data, this is a categorization of the data that you have not yet seen. So I'm putting it here before you. So data could be asymmetric or symmetric. Is this clear to everybody? Any
Yes,
problem
ma'am.
so far? So similarly, please see, even for the transaction data, what kind of data is it? Do you think this is sparse or not? Transaction data. Who will tell me? Anupriya, good morning. Anupriya, you are there? Deepika Arya, Ishani, Komal.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, can you please repeat the question once?
Yeah, come again, Komal.
Ma'am, I missed your question. Can you please repeat that once? Hello?
I can't hear you. You're not audible to me. Can you just
I did my ma'am.
type in the window, chat window, please? Yeah, Komal. So I am asking you that what kind of data do you think is transaction data? Do you think this is sparse data or not? That is what I'm asking. Okay, so this is a very, I am not very happy today, students. Sorry to say that. Because I have repeated this time and again, if you remember. I drew that data for you in the last class, I think, where I showed you that an alternate representation for this kind of transaction data was a kind of Boolean database where there are only ones for the items which are bought. Okay, I specifically said that this kind of a database could be is generally very high dimensional. Okay, so we only store the non-zero entries, and therefore we generally use the sparse data structures for these kind of this kind of data. Okay, I request you to please go through the lectures and come prepared with the earlier ones, because the discussion in each subsequent lecture is based upon our discussion in the previous lectures. Okay, and your response is solicited. Okay, I look forward to your response and feedback. Okay, so your inputs are very important. Please, I need some reply in the lecture to know that you are following what is being done. Okay. Okay. So, uh, transaction data and document term matrix are examples of sparse data matrix. Okay. Please see now. Uh, there is yet another characteristic that is important for us to discuss about the structured data, that is about all these kinds of data that we are going to see, and that is the resolution. Okay, now how does resolution uh, you know characterize data, or why is it important? Please see, resolution of the data is very important because as we change the resolution of the data characteristics may change. For example, if I am looking at the spatial data, that means the surface data, from a very high resolution, then the surface may appear very smooth to me, right? Whereas when I go near, the surface starts, you know, looking, it starts depicting its actual, uh, you know, throws or trumps, right? Where it is elevated and, if there are any pits in it, right? Similarly, if we were to look at the wind data, okay, so if I look at the data from, let's say, a very high resolution, that means, for example, only annually, if I look, then I will be able to zero down on only maybe a single storm, big storm, if there has been any, right? But if I look uh, weekly or maybe hourly, right, then there are many local formation of storms that I may be able to spot. Okay, so these local formation of storms, they occur, and sometimes they generally fly away if, the direction of the wind changes, or if there is a pressure area some at some other point, then these storms, small storms, they don't develop into big storms, they just fly away, right? So if we look at from a very high resolution, we will not be able to gain any information about these small storms, right? Which may turn into storms, if uh, uh, naturally, some pressure area wasn't developed at some other point, or the wind direction, by chance did not change, right? So scientists and governments may like to look at some potentially strong storms which may pose a danger, okay, which may pose a danger, so as to take some, you know, mm, so as to study them first of all for some time, that do they, what is the periodicity with which they reoccur, what is the likelihood of their turning into a strong storm, and if the likelihood is very high, then they may like to take certain measures based on that. Okay, so resolution itself is a very important consideration when we talk about data. Okay, so going back to the record data, we have seen that the data matrix and the document term matrix, and also the market basket data or the transaction data, as I told you earlier, also is also a kind of record data. Okay, so in transaction data, you can see that every row is generally, it depicts one transaction. So one shopping trip of a customer to a particular shop is one transaction. Okay, so this is again a row column kind of a data, so it is a record data. Okay. Now, the next kind of data that we are going to discuss is the graph data. Okay. Now, what is graph data? Why is it important? Graph data is very important in certain kind of scenarios. For example, when the objects have relationships among themselves. If you remember, at the starting of today's class, I told you that when we talk about the record data, we explicitly assume that each of these objects, they are independent of each other, right? That is why, if this was a, let's say, employee database, right, then I assume that one employee is different from another employee, and that is why you assign unique identifiers, right? Even if, please see, the, let's say, the attributes of, suppose I am just, you know storing 10 attributes of the employees, and all 10 attributes of two employees seem to be the same, right? Still, we recognize that they are two different people, right? So we assume that they have their own identities, they are separate, right? No relationship. Okay, and that is why we give them separate employee IDs. That is what happens to you. So people with the same name, with, let's say, there may be two, uh, Amanpreets in your class with the same uh, score in 12th when they came, and the same age and maybe the same date of birth, right? So we so what, how do we distinguish them? We give them a unique roll number, right? Now, when we talk about graph data, please see what kind of data are we talking about. We are talking about the objects that have relationships amongst themselves. Okay, let's see an example of this kind of data so that you understand this more clearly. So as you can see on screen, uh, in this regard, we can look at the web data. Okay, so in web data, please see, each node may be considered as a website or a web page. Okay, and these links, they are also very important. So not only are these web pages or websites important, but also important, very important, are these links between them. First of all, if you can see that, you know, the direction of the link itself gives you some information. For example, this link is giving us an information, for example, that this website is giving reference to this website and not vice versa. Okay, right? Then there might also be some weights attached with these links. Okay. Now, for example, uh, you know, the nodes may be treated as, let's say, people on Facebook. Okay, if we treat that, right? Then the links could, the direction of the links could indicate who is following whom. Okay, or in other words, that is on Twitter, I think. So here we could say, or I think even on Facebook that's there, but who send a friend request to whom? Okay, so a arrow or a link between two nodes could indicate their friendship, and the direction of the link could indicate who sent a friendship request to whom. Okay, and the weight of these arrows may represent how many posts which were posted by this person were liked by this person. Okay, so he liked two posts of this person, or he liked five posts of this person, right? So things like this. So you see that now not just these people themselves are important, the links start giving us much more interesting information, right? So the linkages or the relationships between the objects are also very important, right? So in such cases, graph data becomes very instrumental. Okay. Now, what is the reason of using a graph model to depict such kind of data? Well, we as computer scientists are, already familiarized with the graph data. And when I say familiarized, I mean that we have a large repository of algorithms that already deal with this kind of data. So we know how to deal with this kind of data, right? How to read graphs, how to represent graphs. Then there are so many things such as, a bipartite graph or this kind of a graph, or we know different kinds of traversals that there are. We can find out connected components and all. So within the web, you see, you can find out connected components, for example. So that would give you uh, a set of friends which are connected together, right? A complete group. We can take out a complete group, right? So various concepts which are already studied in the graphs as data structures could be now applied to the new data to find out many new things, right? So that is the beauty of using an existing data structure and mapping it to the data that we have on hand. Okay, I hope you can realize that there there have been active inputs from the researchers who saw the web data and they could map them to the graph data. Okay, so somebody actually sat down and thought that this kind of a data could, be modeled on a graph because he possibly had this kind of a background. For example, your kind of a background where he was already familiarized with the graph data, right? So just by applying, just by visualizing the data in this form, there are so many important inferences that can be drawn. Is this clear to everybody? Can I have a yes or no, please? Hello,
Yes, ma'am.
students. Can I have a
Yes,
feedback?
ma'am.
Thank you. It's so nice to hear your voices. Can I have some more inputs of yes and no? Can some more people speak up, beta? Whether you are able to understand?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks. I feel alive. I feel connected to you this way. Okay. Right. Okay. Uh, yeah. Let us see another example uh, where example scenario where the graph data is employed. So another scenario is, please see, where the objects are themselves maybe graphs. Okay. For example, in chemical data, this is something that the first thing is, please see that this is a very natural representation of the uh, chemical data. We have always been, drawing the molecules like this, if you remember, right? Even in our chemistry classes in 11th, 12th, we used to draw the molecules like this, right? Now, what is beautiful is that, you know, although the drawing here depicts C6H6, we know that any of these atoms could actually be replaced by another molecule, right? If it were not this benzene molecule, instead of this, we could have connected one atom with a completely new molecule. So each of these nodes that you see, they may not be actually just atoms of hydrogen, but maybe a complete molecule of something else, right? So this kind of data is again naturally represented very well with the help of graphs. Another motivation for representing this kind of data through graphs is that we can, as I just told you, do we can apply algorithms which are already available to us for graph data to find out substructures, okay, out of these compounds, okay, which have, let's say, a particular melting point or a particular freezing point or some other chemical properties. This kind of mining, where we mine subgraphs out of the given graph, okay, is also sometimes known as substructure mining. Okay, so we find a subgraph which satisfies a particular set of properties, okay, and we are able to say that, oh, please see that, इसका तो melting point ये है, heating point ये तो उस compound के जैसा है ना? तो इस पर्टिकुलर स्ट्रक्चर का इससे, इस तरह के कंपाउंड से कोई रिलेशन है, तो ये एक नया केमिकल रिएक्शन बन जाएगा, है ना? सो these are the kind of innovation. So this could be used in chemistry, for example, right? To look at least describe, maybe discover new kind of chemical reactions or describe existing chemical reactions, right? So these are the examples of graph data. Now, in next class, I wish to discuss with you the ordered data. So, in the ordered data, again, there are two types of data. One is sequential data and another is sequence data. Or I think we have 5 minutes. If we have 5 minutes, we can discuss. Yeah, I'll just discuss it. Right? So, what is the difference between sequence data and sequential data? Sequence data is the data where the ordering of data, that means, for example, on the screen you see the 4 basic nucleotides of human genomic data. These nucleotides are A, C, T, G. People who have studied biology in 11th, 12th may know this. Even those who don't know this, please know that there are 4 basic nucleotides in human genes. Okay, these are A, C, T, G. And
Excuse me, ma'am.
yes,
Ma'am, I guess the screen is stuck. We cannot see what you are trying to show on the screen.
this, sorry, I'm sorry, the screen is not visible to you.
Ma'am, it was, but it was showing some other page. So we could not understand what you were trying to show on the screen.
Okay, I'll again share this. I'll Stop sharing and again share.
Okay, ma'am.
Is it visible to you now?
Yes, ma'am. Now it is. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. So now when I'm doing, I have done slideshow. Are you able to see the slideshow or the PPT? What are you able to see?
Yes, ma'am. We can see the screen with the PPT.
No, the screen that you are looking at is part of a screen show or only the presentation? You can see the entire PPT, the PowerPoint screen. Do you understand my question?
Yes, ma'am. We can see the entire PPT screen, all the
Entire
options.
PPT. Okay, so it is
Yes, ma'am.
not showing you the slideshow when I'm doing slideshow.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, okay, okay. Okay, no problem. I'll do it from here only. So please see on the screen, you can see that there are four genome nucleotides of human genes, that is A, C, T, and G. Now, the ordering of these nucleotides generally determines the characteristics, okay, of our genes. Okay, so the sequence in which these are arranged is very important. Okay, and so sequence mining is done in these, uh, genomics data sometimes to find out which people have similar genomic sequence. Okay, that may tell us something about maybe the kind of hair that they have or are likely to have, or whether they're going to go bald, okay, or whether they're going to suffer from certain diseases, okay, if their genomic sequences like the genomic sequence of some people who have that disease X, right? So the sequence is very important here. Now let us look at another kind of data, that is the transactional data, for example. Okay, now in the transactional data, for example, as we've seen here, if you remember the kind of data matrix that I drew for you for the transactional data, I had also written the transaction date and time. Right. Now, this is not showing the transaction date and time, but generally transaction date and time are always there. That means the time stamp of when that transaction has occurred is generally always there. Okay. So this kind of data where there is explicit time stamping. Okay. Now, obviously, there where the time stamps are present, the sequences will be important. The data is going to be ordered vis-a-vis the timestamps, right? Yes or no? Yes or no, students? When I'm saying that the data is arranged as per time, that means it is ordered as per time. So the sequence is important. But what is different from sequence data? So what is the difference in sequence data and sequential data? In sequence data, only the ordering is important. The explicit timestamps are not there. But in the sequential data, the sequence or the ordering obviously comes into being, but explicit timestamps are also there. Okay, so we have an added element of time in the sequential data. Okay, so sequential data such as this transaction data where there are explicit timestamps are also known as temporal data. Is this clear? So this is the last kind of data that we had to discuss. And in the next class, I will be talking about, we will start with the next concept that is of the various problems with the data. For example, the noise and the outliers and the missing values. Okay. I'm going to be sharing the recording with you now. Sorry, attendance with you now. Please wait for a minute. This is the link for theory attendance. Please mark your attendance.